Good morning, everybody. Happy Easter Sunday to you all. And, of course, happy birthday to the Royal Air Force, who are 100 years old today. They say that at the time, many people thought, why on earth would you found a new service on April Fool's Day? But, hey, in the last 100 years, they've confounded any negative thoughts about them. And from 11 o'clock, I'm going to interview a very senior RAF historian. I'm going to interview a 97-year-old RAF veteran who was up there in the skies back in 1940. But for now, I'm sure many of you have been busy with Easter egg hunts this morning and all sorts of happy things. One person who I don't think is going to be feeling full of spring cheer today is the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, because it's all over the front pages. Sunday Times exposed Corbyn's hate factory, and that's about 20 websites who are not official Labour Party websites, but they support Corbyn and the party, and all sorts of horrible things are being said on those websites, and a lot of them relate to Jews and that religion. So the anti-Semitism row is not going away. In fact, in many ways, I think it seems to be growing, because there are so many cases that have been referred of members of the Labour Party. John Mann comments in the Mail on Sunday, and John Mann, who's been very much at the forefront of being deeply critical of Ken Livingstone and others that he sees himself as being anti-Semitic, and he says there are 74 cases of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party that are currently going through the party's disciplinary procedure, albeit very slowly, but he says it could be as many as 5,000 in his view. So John Mann feeling very strongly and basically saying, John Mann is saying that this problem is much deeper than even the front page of today's Sunday newspapers suggest. Now, what have we heard from Jeremy Corbyn? Well, he has given a Passover message.
It's easy to denounce anti-Semitism when you see it in other countries, in other political movements. It's sometimes harder to see it when it's closer to home. We in the Labour movement will never be complacent about anti-Semitism. We all need to do better. I'm committed to ensuring the Labour Party is a welcoming and secure place for Jewish people. And I hope this Passover will mark a move to stronger and closer relations between us and everybody in the Jewish community. In the fight against anti-Semitism, I'm your ally and always will be.
Well, well, well. It's easy to see anti-Semitism when it's elsewhere, but, and I quote, it's sometimes harder to see it when it's close to home. Does that convince you this Easter Sunday morning that Jeremy Corbyn fully understands the problem? Has he perhaps convinced himself that it's just the media having a go? He did say earlier in the week that there were pockets of anti-Semitism that existed within Labour. Not the odd isolated case, but pockets. And yet, he doesn't appear to have been very decisive about this. Now, for me, I can speak on this subject, I think, with more clarity than anybody else alive in this country today. Why? Because I led UKIP for all those years, and as we started to rise in the polls and break through 10% and to start to win council seats and to start to do very well, the standard attack on UKIP was to find a council candidate, to find somebody who was a UKIP member who'd said something on Facebook or Twitter or elsewhere, and to put the whole lot together and to say, look, actually, this lot are really a bunch of freaks. They've got all sorts of really odd, weird views. They've got homophobes, racists, etc. And this went on month after month after month. In fact, it's not really true. It went on year after year. It never, ever stopped. Did it damage UKIP? Well, they never really got very close to the top of the party with this. They generally were isolated incidents. I mean, you know, a Methodist preacher who lived in Henley, who was a town councillor, who happened to take a very Old Testament view of the world. But you know something? Cumulatively, bit by bit by bit, it was sapping. And I would think there were some fairly, you know, people who perhaps had been thinking, should I vote UKIP? Should I desert my normal party and vote UKIP, and I guess they were put off from doing so. Didn't stop us forcing a referendum, didn't stop us winning the European elections, didn't stop us getting 4 million votes in the general election, but I do think we'd have got more than that had it not been for this non-stop campaign. And I did feel at times, you know, how's this my fault? How is this my fault? How can I be responsible, you know, for what somebody living out in the Shires has said on Facebook when they've come back from the pub? But what we did have was a very strict disciplinary procedure. People who were clearly in breach were out on their ear, PDQ. What we also had were criteria for joining the party, I think unlike any other in the country. There was a big declaration that, you know, you'd never been a member of the BNP or any other organisation. I did my absolute best to stop people from joining who could be seen to be extremists. I don't think Corbyn has been as careful as that. Because think back to when it was £3 to join the Labour Party. £3 to join the Labour Party and everyone gets a vote. Whee, what fun. So they did. Hundreds of thousands of them, without, to my knowledge, any of them signing any declarations, without any checks being made as to who these people were. And so I suspect they've let in a lot of people with views that they now are going to continually keep coming back to bite them. But perhaps more damning is that their disciplinary procedure of those who are seen to have said very unpleasant anti-Semitic things, well, people get suspended for short periods, then get let back in. In one particular case, I'm rather amused. There's a woman who used to protest outside my meetings, carrying big boards saying how awful I was, and she's currently suspended for anti-Semitism. So, you know, forgive me for perhaps enjoying that one. But I think what will happen now, and here's my prediction. My prediction is they found lots of people on these Labour supporting sites and Labour members that have said things that are deemed to be anti-Semitic. This will now move on. It will now move on to homophobia. It will now move on to, I've no doubt, misogyny. You know, and we will start to see people who are Labour supporters, who've got strong religious beliefs, will start to be condemned for their views. And I think Corbyn is actually in a bit of trouble. Whether it's fatal, I can't say. I doubt it, because I think amongst the membership of the party, he's still seen as a bit of a hero. But what happens to those people out there? You know, we call it Middle England, but it could be Middle South Wales, or it could be Mid-Scotland. What happens to those people that Labour needs to get to vote for them to win those marginal seats at the next election? Does a continual drip of unpleasantness and nastiness like this that has not been dealt with decisively by the party, does that perhaps have an impact on the polls and potentially an impact on the next general election? I think it does. So, I'm asking you, do you think Jeremy Corbyn can survive as leader given this onslaught? And if you think, well, actually, give him one more chance, and he may just be a little bit more decisive than he was with that Passover message, call 0345 6060 973, or perhaps you think, it's too late, it's gone. He had his chance to deal with it, he hasn't, it's time that he went. You can text to 84850, or maybe you're one of those who thinks he's actually been grossly unfairly attacked by the Daily Mail group, for example, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course watch us on Facebook, comment there too. James is calling from Dulwich. He's my first caller this morning. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Nigel.
So how much trouble is he in, James?
Well, unfortunately for Jeremy, he's got the media and the PLP who hate him going after him. They've already thrown the kitchen sink at him during the last general election, and now they're trying their last card, which is anti-Semitism. I mean, anti-Semitism is rife throughout society. And
is it?
Well,
do you think in modern-day Britain anti-Semitism is still rife throughout society?
Yeah, it is. So is racism, unfortunately. It may be unlawful, but it's still there.
And what do you think the reason for that is, James?
Well, it's always been. It's always been.
Okay.
You're not going to change something that's always been.
Okay. And tell me, James, are you a Corbyn supporter?
I like his policies, but the Parliamentary Labour Party hate him.
Mm-hmm.
So he's actually fighting against two fronts. He's fighting against his own party and the media. You see, he's the only major British political leader that's actually criticised the Israeli government. Now, because he's got a whiff of actual power, he's actually deemed a threat now. So,
but James, if there are people, James, if there are people within the Labour Party membership and who are members of the party who've posted things saying that the Holocaust was a hoax, what do you think the Labour Party should do in that circumstance?
Well, they have procedures. The Labour Party is the biggest party in Europe.
Yes.
And I'm sure if you go to any big parties, you'll find the same thing. Nothing in the Labour Party is different from any other political party. Absolutely nothing.
Well, my argument, James, and I take your point, the bigger the party, the bigger the risk you're going to have of people saying things, you know, off left or whatever it may be. But, James, my point is that the party's disciplinary procedure doesn't appear to be very robust in cases such as anti-Semitism, and that really, I think, is Corbyn's Achilles heel right at the moment.
Well, the BBC tried to smear him a few weeks ago with him standing outside the Kremlin with the hat, and you can see all these things, and
yeah.
when they interview people, they sort of give anti-Corbyn people more airtime than supporters. I mean, there was a Jewish woman that was being interviewed. She actually supported Jeremy Corbyn, and she was just cut off every single time.
All right, so they're being a bit unfair. James, I thank you. John on Facebook says the more this goes on, the more obvious it is that it's a smear campaign. Well, I tell you what, as leader of UKIP, I knew all about those too. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. It's now 10:15. The anti-Semitism row with Jeremy Corbyn ploughs on and on and on. And yes, of course, the Tory supporting press are having a field day with this. I understand that fully. I just personally think their party's disciplinary procedures don't appear to be particularly robust. Let's give you an example. You know, Tom Watson, deputy leader, kicked up a big stink about a Labour member who was accused of Holocaust denial, and his suspension was opposed by Christine Shawcroft, a member of Labour's NEC. So a battle between a member of the NEC and the deputy leader, again, for me, from UKIP, it's all familiar territory in many ways. And overnight, Christine Shawcroft has resigned and been replaced by Eddie Izzard, who never ever gets elected onto Labour's NEC, but now because she's fallen off, he's jumped up the ladder. But there is more collateral damage. Sir David Garrard, a major donor to the party, and bear in mind this party gets most of its money from the trade unions, but David Garrard, who's given roughly £1.5 million over the last few years to Labour, David Garrard says, as one of the former leading political and financial supporters of the party, of which I was a member for many decades, I no longer feel any affinity with or connection to what it has now become. So there is some collateral damage out there, and my prediction is there's more to come. You know, we will see stuff on these sites that will be said to be homophobic, will be said to be misogynistic. I think there's more to come. Now, on Twitter, Janice says to me, no, Corbyn is not in trouble. Every football ground, even the boxing last night, were singing, oh, Jeremy Corbyn. Well, I have to say, after that Joshua fight last night, I couldn't quite make out what the noise was. Can somebody please, who was there, tell me, were they singing, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, after the Joshua win last night, or not? With everything he has done during his leadership, and now this too, Corbyn's political career is dead, says Chris. Well, don't speak too soon. The Labour members who are now denying anti-Semitism in their ranks are the same people who said, of course, not all Leave voters are racist, but you can be sure racists voted to leave. Well, the boot's on the other foot now, says Tony. Tony, I had these people standing outside my public meetings with placards. If ever I got, within close distance of them, they would try to throw things at me or bash me over the head. And they are now the ones in some trouble. That's the only bit about this that pleases me. Joshua is my next caller from Kensington and a first-time caller to this show. Good morning, Joshua.
Good morning, Nigel. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you. And I was suggesting earlier that it may not be that happier Easter Sunday morning for Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, unfortunately, I think Jeremy Corbyn is going to survive. And
So do I.
And I have to say one thing. Jeremy Corbyn speaks with forked tongue. He says one thing and actually means another. What he's saying is that I'm against it. I haven't done anything. This is not my fault. I haven't said anything like this at all. I haven't seen these things. And then all of a sudden you see people coming out supporting him with those views, and he's doing nothing about it.
Joshua, is it possible, Joshua, that you're being influenced by the right-wing press?
No. You know why?
Go on.
I'm a Labour supporter.
Okay, right, fine. Okay.
Yeah, listen, my dad was the most socialist person you've ever met in your life.
Right.
Okay? Right? Okay. I understand. I want the NHS to survive. I want it to develop. I want it to be something. I want a multicultural Britain, and I love it for it. You know what I mean? But besides that, he's attracted people that want a really far left-wing Soviet kind of type of view, which is anti-Western. Not just anti-Jewish, but anti-Western, anti-American.
Yep.
Okay? And you know one thing you said really right, correctly, earlier, and you think it's going to now move on to the other thing. Let me start it off. Hamas, the people that he supports, calls him his friends, are so anti-homophobic.
Well, I've made this prediction already, Joshua, haven't I? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you go now. He shared a platform with homophobes. Forget about anti-Israel. He shared a platform with homophobes. And he's been campaigning for gay rights and this, that, and the other. And he threw them out the window as soon as he went there.
Yes.
He didn't go, and which country in the Middle East has actually supported people like that? What I don't understand about this, these guys, they're virulently anti-Israel that they throw every other single, what's the word I'm looking for? Every single thing that they hold dear out the window because it's anti-Israel. And then they come on.
So in the end, Joshua, he can't get away with this, can he? He can't pretend to be for multiculturalism, for gay rights, for a multicultural Britain, for tolerance, whilst at the same time having friends like Hamas, Hezbollah, and goodness knows who else.
Exactly. Who throw people off the buildings, who have no legislation to protect gays or homosexual or any type of minority gender, any of that transgender thing, you go to the and find out, that kind of thing. And you see where it is. Now, the thing is, they throw that out the window because they're anti-Western, anti-Israel, anything to do with capitalism or anything like that. I'm a Labour supporter.
Joshua, I'm so pleased that you've said all these things on this phone call, because I was tempted to say them all earlier. I just hinted at them. If I'd said them, I'd be condemned for making racist comments and being vile. But you've said them, Joshua, and you've hit the nail on the head. Like you, I don't think that he is going to be removed as leader over all of this, because his own support base within the membership is too strong. But do you think, Joshua, as a Labour supporter that wants a Labour government, do you think this is all enough to deny him victory at the next election?
I personally don't think I've actually said anything racist or anything.
No, nor do I. But that's not. But no. But if I say it, Joshua, it would be deemed racist because you make comment about some extremists within the religion of Islam who throw homosexuals off buildings. Even making that comment leaves you open to the accusation.
Well, Hamas is an organisation. I didn't say Islam or anything like that at all.
No.
What I did say is that when you go to see the worldview that these people have got, they think that the West is the problem. The issue, and as Israel is ally to the West, and when you see these things, they'll blind themselves from any other topic that may be important to them, or they say that it's important to them. They blind themselves completely, and that's the problem. Now, this anti-Semitism that's come up, I agree, has been around for years, but it's been polarized in the Labour Party, and it's drawn people to him. Now, there's a heck of a lot. I'm not saying everyone is, but there's a heck of a lot going on there. We see a lot of this on the Facebook profiles. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to turn into a little bit of France. When that lady, that 85-year-old woman, died recently?
Yeah. Holocaust survivor murdered. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
in what was clearly, in what seemed to be, what the French police said was a racist crime. Joshua, thank you for your call, your points and your passion. Answer coming back, just because a few idiots at Glastonbury chanted, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," the actual tune has been used at boxing way before Corbynism. Thank you. I think that maybe explains my slight incomprehension at hearing that this morning. John is calling from Hendon. John, hello.
Good morning. Basically, I don't know what to start. This is just I've been in this city for 56 years.
Yeah.
I'm from Israel, and it's racism has been there from day one ever since I come. This whole thing has been taken out of proportions by the right-wing media. And they're doing very good job over it at the moment. And basically, Jeremy Corbyn, although I'm not a big fan of his, but for the first time I will vote for him. I'm fed up with Theresa May, with all the lies and all the other stuff they've done, all the promises with Brexit. The small example I'll give you, he sacked somebody last week because they said something against Brexit. And what has Theresa May done so far all this time? Nothing. So I go back to everybody else that's ringing in. Yeah, read the small print. This is all the media. All they're trying to do. There's the election coming up. You've experienced some of this yourself.
I know, John. I've absolutely. I know exactly how it works. John, let me ask you a slightly broader question. You know, living in North London, have you noticed over the last 2 decades that anti-Semitism is now a bigger problem in North London than it was?
It's not a North London issue. It's all over the Europe.
Well, yeah, it's certainly there in Brussels. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's certainly there in Paris, because thousands are leaving, of Jewish people are leaving every year.
Where were these guys before? What's happened all of a sudden? Nothing has happened. They're just making things worse because of the election coming up. And for the first time, I'll be voting for him and Labour.
All right.
In my life, I've been a Conservative supporter.
John, why is that? John, let me ask you again. Why is anti-Semitism on the rise in North London, in Brussels and in Paris?
I can't answer that, but at the end of the day, it's definitely an increase without doubt. But like I said, I've been in this country for 56 years, and I've experienced many cases in the past. Nothing is different by this time.
No, John is convinced that it is a big, thank you for your call, it's a big media smear. He's going to vote for Corbyn anyway. More on Brexit, I think, than anything else. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It is now 10:30. Well, Jeremy Corbyn has got problems. The front pages of the newspapers, the Tory supporting ones, I say that because it's true, they don't like him very much, but the accusations keep on coming. I think there are more that will come. I'm asking you whether he can survive as leader. I think he will survive, but I think he'll be damaged by it. Before I get back to that, the Electoral Commission was set up back in 2001 by Tony Blair to clean up British politics. And it seems to me all they've really presided over in the course of those years is the House of Lords being stuffed full of party donors, a massive growth in postal voting with the associated fraud and intimidation that goes with that, a damn near successful attempt to close UKIP down in 2010, and other than that, they've achieved absolutely nothing. But are they impartial? Because surely if they're judging, they're looking back at the Brexit referendum and seeing accusations being made by people who work within Vote Leave. They've been investigating Leave.eu for nearly 400 days now, so I'm told. But just look at some of the people that are on them. Take Lord Horam. Now, I mean, here's a proper Blairite career politician. Started off as a Labour MP, then became an SDP MP, then became a Conservative MP, then went to the House of Lords and now sits on the panel of the Electoral Commission. Told the House of Lords recently he could see the logic in a second referendum. Well, how on earth can he adjudge these cases if his own prejudicial view is still out there being put today? Or let's try Sir John Holmes, who's going to be the next chairman of Elcom, who spoke about the panoply of Eurosceptic nonsense articulated during the campaign. Bit tough to see how he can be an impartial chairman, given he's saying this now on the record. Or we could try Bridget Prentice, saying that Tony Blair was spot on when he declared that Brexit was not inevitable. Or we could move on to a former Lib Dem MP, David Howarth, who said that the young should not be bound by the referendum, claiming that Leave voters were older and dying, and that actually many of them were full of racist violence and an emotional response. I mean, the whole thing is just extraordinary. It clearly, ELCOM has been a failure. Clearly, British politics is more corrupt than it was when it was set up back in 2001. And, you know, when people sit as judges in courts or whatever it may be, they're supposed to leave behind their personal opinions and certainly not to opine in public. I would have thought all of those people should just be kicked off the Electoral Commission, and we should try again. Because how on earth can people like that judge what either side have done right or wrong when they look back at the referendum campaign of 2016? And I really think it's almost become as if career politicians, ex-MPs, fill up all of these jobs. And I'm not sure that that is the right way round. Back to Corbyn. Will he survive? Diane on Facebook says, yes, he will survive. But the Labour Party needs to strengthen its disciplinary policy and enact it. Well, you can say that again. None of the parties screen their membership. I did try. And the Italian Five-Star Movement, by the way, do screen their membership. And once those members have been screened and join that online forum, they can then vote for party policy, for new leaders, for candidates. That's how they do it. Most members adhere to the rules of behaviour. It is a very small amount that have to go down the disciplinary route. Diane, that may well be true, but as I know from my own experience, the fact that it's a small amount, or to quote Jeremy, pockets of anti-Semitism doesn't make it any better. Peter says, on the subject of anti-Semitism, I can't believe that people are still fighting over religion. It's the 21st century. Peter, just have a look around the world. Not much really has changed, to be frank. Dave says, Corbyn will be our next PM. Get used to it, Farage. Well, fine, Dave. I mean, do ring up and tell me why. Dave, do ring up on 0345 6060 973 and tell me why none of this will affect Jeremy Corbyn's chances, because I think in those marginal seats that he needs to win, it may well make a difference. Sheila says the Labour Party has been hijacked by some extremists. And back to the boxing last night. And Ian Brown's helping me out here. He says, at the boxing, they were singing, "Oh, Anthony Joshua." And no football ground sings about Corbyn ever. Right? OK, thank you very much indeed. Please, people who know about that, please let me know. I'm going to go to Alex, who lives in Mill Hill. Good morning, Alex. Is Corbyn in trouble?
Well, I don't think he's in trouble, but I think that the media would like to give that impression to the public. And we have to assume that our public get its news from much broader sources now. So I'm not convinced. I mean, this is a really good topic for you, though, Nigel, because you faced a lot of this yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Loads of it.
And,
years of it.
You know, you've spoken a lot of truth about it. And I think the problem Corbyn has got is when you're popular, and he is popular, particularly online, or supported by normal people. I mean, I've met some of them. I do some writing as an investigative journalist. And what I think's going on is that you've got different groups that are noticing that Corbyn's doing very well in the polls. I think it was about 2 weeks ago there was a poll, wasn't there, that he was way ahead of the Conservatives, and Theresa May has been trying to struggle to catch up.
I mean, Alex, do you know what? Whatever the polls say today doesn't really matter. The fact is that he has performed since that election was called almost exactly a year ago now. You know, he's had a dramatic surge in his own personal popularity. And as you say, the more popular you are, the higher your head is above the political parapet, the more it's going to get shot at. And I understand that, Alex. I really, really do.
You know what, Nigel? At the root of this is your issue, Brexit, because what people, if you didn't notice, it was the anniversary with a year to go until we come out.
I did notice this, yes.
And I think for people like Chuka Umunna and some of these other Labour usual suspects, that's the signal for them. And I work in the Jewish community in North London, and that's the signal for them to say, right, let's see if we can use this issue, let's milk this issue as much as we can.
Are you suggesting, Alex, are you suggesting that, and I won't mention any names, it wouldn't be fair, but are you suggesting that the really strong pro-Remain, we want a second referendum types that are part of the Parliamentary Labour Party are happy for these stories about Corbyn and anti-Semitism to be published or perhaps even leaked out every day?
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things I've done online, Nigel, is that a lot of the time people have sent me threads claiming that there's anti-Semitism. When we examine it, as part of the investigation group, what we find is these are spoof accounts that have been set up by people who are not. They've got pictures of Jeremy Corbyn on their posts, but they're not actually Jeremy Corbyn supporters, and they post all sorts of nonsense. And a lot of people who are in that movement on the left, they need to be very careful of these groups, because there's a lot of them about there.
Oh, Alex, look, I understand that fully. I understand that fully, but when it is members, clearly members or candidates or councillors of the Labour Party that say extreme and anti-Semitic things, then it's different, Alex, isn't it? And I would put it to...
But those people wouldn't last a minute, Nigel, in any party.
But here's the point, Alex.
They'll be gone.
But here's the point, Alex. Actually, they seem to be surviving within the Labour Party. Lengthy disciplinary procedures, brief suspensions, and then they're back.
No, because the problem you've got, Nigel, just because people are talking about anti-Semitism doesn't mean anti-Semitism exists. Talk is cheap. Facts and reality and evidence are totally different. There's something called due process of law, and that means that people have to be investigated if allegations are made against them. What some of these people would like is that people to just say things and people to be automatically sacked. And if that were to be the case, they'd turn around to
I know.
They'd say to him that you can't do that, you're not giving people a chance, you're sacking people without...
Is it your view, Alex? Is it your view, as somebody that studies this very closely, is it your view that this is one of those crises that will just blow over and in 6 months we'll have forgotten about it?
Well, the more the chance that the British public want to vote Jeremy Corbyn as their Prime Minister, the more the groups that are... the more the groups that want to undermine him will come up with stories from 15 years ago.
Alex, do you know what? Do you know what? And particularly as today is the 100th anniversary of the RAF, I will draw that parallel of Corbyn and me that you mentioned. So it was in 2013.
Yes.
And we had just had a 30% score in the Eastleigh by-election. We were about to beat the Labour Party nationally in the English county elections, and it was off to the races. And I started to get abuse on an industrial scale. I mean, it really was a bit...
I remember it.
Oh, yeah. And I got a letter, Alex. I got a letter in very, very spidery handwriting. And the bloke said, "Dear Mr. Farage, you don't know me. I'm 93 years old. During the war, I served in Bomber Command. And let me tell you something. You only start taking flak when you're getting near the target. Keep going, yours sincerely." And I reckon that brings this discussion between you and I and the 100th anniversary of the RAF together quite nicely. Alex from Mill Hill, I thank you. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It is now 10:45. Well, I'm asking you, will Corbyn survive these constant attacks in the newspapers, albeit mostly Conservative supporting ones, over allegations of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and in many Facebook groups that publicly say they support Corbyn and the Labour Party? Now, I think he will survive it. One person who doesn't is Peter Oborne, who wrote in yesterday's Daily Mail, "I'll make a prediction. Under fire, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn will soon be gone. He said, this week, with a heavy heart, I changed my mind." And that's because Peter Oborne has been saying he thinks Jeremy Corbyn's a very decent bloke, and he said so repeatedly. He said, "I'm now convinced that there is something detestable about Corbyn's politics, which makes it impossible to defend him any more." And because he's changed his mind about how decent he thought Corbyn was, he thinks others will too. I don't know. I'm being absolutely inundated by messages. His supporters will readily turn a blind eye, says Jane. He is a disgrace and should resign. If he stays, then the boundaries of hate are pushed to more acceptable levels. The man has shown the dignity to survive anything thrown at him. He's got my support, says Ian. He will survive, and with no problem. I get on Twitter. My theory is Corbyn's only there because of a lack of a proper candidate for Labour leader. As soon as one is found, Corb will be out of the spotlight, says Louise. Well, I'm not so sure about that, but Corbyn should stay as leader. It is outrageous that Jeremy Corbyn has been blamed for other people's social media posts. Well, as I said earlier, I know all about that. If anyone has evidence of anti-Semitism, they should report it to the police. It is not possible for Corbyn to police the internet. If the law has been broken, the police should have... Well, Sarah, that's fine, but the truth of it is, you can't police the internet, and you can't stop people online saying they love you or hate you, and you can't do much about that. But what you can do, Sarah, is you can be in charge of your own party, and that, I think, is where the failing is. Manjeet is calling from Peterborough. Good morning, Manjeet.
It's Manjeet. Nigel, good morning. And before I start, first of all, a very peaceful, happy Easter to everyone, to you, and to everybody listening, regardless who they vote for and what their political
Absolutely, thank you. I agree with that totally.
Right, first of all, okay, Nigel. I don't believe Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. However, I think he's taken his eye off the ball and he's turned a blind eye completely to what's been going on. I can only talk about my own town here in Peterborough. And I think one of the problems is now, and this is going on up and down the country in large cities, we've got certain groups who've taken over big areas of the Labour Party in London, Manchester, Birmingham, the North East, wherever have you. And they're not Asians, I'm not going to mince my words, they're mostly Kashmiri or Pakistani origins who've taken over large parts of the Labour Party with an agenda, and unfortunately they found an ally with the left wing as well. And the two things they hate are the Americans and the Israelis and capitalism. Those three things they really detest.
That does rather bring them all together, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does bring them all together, and they can be quite intimidating if you try and through personal experience, if you speak out, you are gagged, you are intimidated. And the Labour Party really and truthfully doesn't want to see itself as a racist party, so it's turned a blind eye totally. And I think that's what Jeremy Corbyn's done, along with a lot of the hierarchy, unfortunately. And now it's come back to bite him.
Majid, do you see this as being about religion or about nationality?
It's probably both. It's a question. I mean, obviously, if you have anything positive to say about Israel, you are automatically condemned, sort of thing. They can't get past the history, they can't get past what's going on. Okay, Israel is not the greatest country in the world, they've got a lot of wrongs as well, but, it needs compromise, and the thing is, these are so entrenched hatreds that go back for years and years and years, and they just can't move away from them. And it doesn't help when Jeremy Corbyn goes onto stage with a PLO scarf on or on stage with Hamas. All it has done is reinforced.
I think doesn't help is a slight understatement, isn't it?
Well, precisely. It just doesn't help. And in fact, it legitimises that. And that's what he's done. And now, it was okay when he wasn't in power. He's a backbencher, he'd get away with it. But now, all of a sudden, he's a leader of the party. And all those things now are coming back to haunt him. And he's really now got to decide where he stands. Either he's going to totally expel these people and make a clean slate of it, or he just does a U-turn and says, OK, get on and do what you want.
Now, you're in a very marginal seat, aren't you? You're in it was a Conservative-held seat, Stuart Jackson, but Labour managed to take it. So, yeah, it is in seats like this where actually people will make their decisions based on, do they think this is a horrible smear, or is there a real problem? Listen, I thank you for your call. I better move on to Peter, who's calling from Northwood. Peter, good morning.
Good morning to you, Nigel. I think the caller before last seemed to think that this anti-Semitism is invented, which I find absolutely staggering, because the evidence is now so great. I mean, the Facebook sites, which I understand have 400,000 followers, are full of classic anti-Semitic tropes. I mean, Corbyn himself, people keep saying, Jeremy Corbyn hasn't got an anti-Semitic bone in his body, but if you walk like a duck and you talk like a duck and you mix with ducks, at some stage someone's going to call you a duck. And the fact is he mixes with, he calls Hamas and Hezbollah his friends. And I think the left wing have taken over the Labour Party, which is extremely sad because, of course, Jews generally were the biggest supporters of the Labour Party going back to the beginning of the 20th century when it started coming to the UK. Yeah, I mean,
that is some time ago, Peter, and even before the RAF was founded, Peter, so it is a long time ago.
I think where the problem is, Nigel, is the way that university campuses have been hijacked both by the left wing and particularly the very anti-Israel sentiment, which is getting worse. And, of course, it's compounded on Facebook. And, of course, there is a link between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. You can be anti-Israel or against
Yes, of course, and that,
which is fine.
Yeah,
Anti-Zionism is actually anti-Semitic per se.
Peter, I'm with you. I think we're in denial over the growth of anti-Semitism.
That's a big problem.
We're in denial, and it's happening in Paris, it's happening in Brussels, it's happening in the United Kingdom, and we're in denial. Peter, I thank you. I've got time for one last caller on this. Dominic, who's a first-time caller to this show, and he's calling from Banbury in Oxfordshire. Good morning, Dominic.
Hello, good morning, Nigel. I was just going to make a few points. I'm an ex-Labour member myself. I gladly cancelled my membership a few months ago.
Because?
And, sorry?
Because?
Oh, well, a whole list of reasons. I didn't list anti-Semitism at the time, but I just... Well, but the basic reason is because of Jeremy Corbyn. Personally, I just can't stand the guy. So...
OK, but a lot of people do like him, Dominic.
The point, the important point there is, do a lot of voters like him? Obviously, a majority of the membership of the Labour Party, they adore him. They think he's some sort of secular Jesus. But do a majority of voters like him? So, Jeremy Corbyn's even got the same initials as Jesus Christ. I mean, I'm sure. Well, obviously that's a coincidence.
Dominic, it's Easter. This could be blasphemy. But anyway, go on. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. But the question you ask is, will he survive? I think he will survive, and that is, to me, that is evidence of why the Labour Party is done as a party of government. And, that's also, I think, good evidence for why the Labour Party, it will split, because moderates like me, our patience isn't inexhaustible. Mine ran out in January. At some point, the moderates in the party, the moderate MPs and members, they would just decide, we've had enough. We cannot put up with this anymore. Every time there's a leadership election, some hard left MP is going to get elected.
Yeah, it's difficult.
So at some point...
Well, that's what Mr. Blair and others are thinking about, a new SDP-type party in Dominic. If Labour is seen to be completely hijacked by the hard left and they are anti-capitalist, anti-Western, anti-American and anti-Jewish, then that split will happen. Dominic, I thank you very much indeed for your call. I thank all of you for your calls. Believe me, this story is going to run and run. There'll be a whole load more. Next, it'll be homophobia. Then it'll be misogyny. Will it make a difference? Well, a lot of you are going to stick with Corbyn regardless. Now, next, the Royal Air Force turns 100 today and will celebrate the centenary with a church service in London. Senior figures and veterans from the RAF will attend the Founders' Day service at the Church of St Clement Danes on the Strand in London. The Queen has sent a message of congratulations, and a 100-day baton relay will be started on the steps of the Royal Courts of Justice. I want to know from you, what has the RAF meant to you and your family? Call me on 0345 6060 973, text to 84850. Rarely play music on this show, but you're listening there to the RAF March, those very familiar tones. And it's worth reflecting, isn't it, that 100 years ago today the Royal Air Force was formed. It was a merger, effectively, of the Army's Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Navy's Royal Naval Air Service. And today, many events going on. There's Stowe Mary's in Essex, which is an airfield exactly as it was back in 1918, at Biggin Hill, of course, the most famous fighter station of them all, and very near where I grew up. Many events going on there. And at the Church of St Clement Danes, at the end of the Strand here in London, senior figures and veterans from the RAF are attending a Founders' Day service, and the Queen has sent a message of congratulations. And if ever you're in London, in the Strand area, you've got some free time, go into the church and you'll see the Roll of Honour and all the people in both wars that were killed serving in the Royal Air Force. It is, in its own way, pretty humbling. I was very keen for us to talk about this subject today because whilst I think all of us know a fair bit about the Battle of Britain, about the still continuing controversy that exists over Bomber Command and the bombing of German cities through late 44 into 45, hardly any of us really know much about what the Royal Air Force did from the 1st of April 1918 through to the 11th of November 1918. So I thought, well, I need to get a proper expert on, and, well, I didn't do badly because I managed to get Seb Cox in, and he is head of the Air Historical Branch of the Royal Air Force. He came in at 9:15 this morning to do a pre-record because, of course, he's there at the Church of St Clement Danes as we speak. And I began by asking him about the birth of the Royal Air Force and why it was so tricky.
Well, yes, you could put it like that. Yeah, there were a variety of factors which led to the birth of the Royal Air Force. The principal one initially was the Germans bombed London in the summer of 1917. They bombed it in daylight. They flew a formation of aircraft over London during the day in that summer, dropped bombs on London. And the two air services which were existent at the time, there was the Royal Flying Corps, part of the Army, the Royal Naval Air Service, part of the Navy. They sent up aircraft to try and intercept the Germans, but in fact we lost more aircraft than the Germans did.
Oh, wow.
So bombing London in daylight and without any very obvious defensive reaction caused a bit of a row. The media reacted very sharply. There was a lot of press comment, and the Prime Minister came under a certain amount of fire in the House of Commons. So Lloyd George, the Prime Minister at the time, he appointed, interestingly enough, a South African general, Smuts. A South African, I think, because he was seen as being slightly more neutral than a British general would have been. And Smuts was appointed to investigate the whole of the organisation of British air defences and British air services in general. And it was Smuts, largely influenced by a leading airman, General Henderson, it was Smuts who recommended that the two separate Navy and Army air services should be merged into one. And that essentially was the result. We get the Royal Air Force.
But I read that the Army resented it, the Navy resented it.
They both, parts of them opposed it at the time, but Lloyd George, in part I think because he was a little bit aggravated by the leading servicemen. He had a combative relationship with some of the senior generals.
He said he did, yeah.
So I think it was also part of his plan to try and circumvent the generals. And so essentially, although the admirals and the generals, or some of them, were opposed to it, the politicians pushed it through anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting because we sort of know quite a lot about World War II. What interests me is how little people seem to know about, and you mentioned the bombing raid by aeroplane, and of course prior to that the Zeppelins. But give us some idea of the scale of the RAF on the Western Front by the end of the First World War.
Well, the RAF as a whole, at the end of the war, there are 22,000 aircraft.
That's a mind-blowing number.
Yeah, and about more than 200,000 personnel, men and women. So it was an enormous enterprise. Now, that 22,000 included a lot of aircraft in reserve because these are canvas and wooden biplanes. They're not very reliable. They are relatively easy to shoot down in terms of, they catch fire quite easily, unfortunately. So it's perfectly possible that a squadron would turn over its entire complement of aircraft in a month.
Yeah, and I've read that life expectancy for a pilot
it varied. Yeah, it varied, but at times it wasn't very good. They had no parachutes, of course. These poor chaps up at 10,000 feet. If their aircraft catches fire,
that's
that.
Yeah. And of course, with the end of the war to end all wars, there was no need for a Royal Air Force, really, was there?
Well, that's what the Navy and the Army, you'll be surprised to learn, that's exactly what they said. They said, well, some sort of wartime, we don't need an Air Force in anymore. We only formed it during this rather major war. And as the defence budget, funny old thing, Treasury is demanding
doesn't
cuts.
Change, does it?
Well, I couldn't possibly comment on that, Nigel, but the Treasury certainly, and indeed Lloyd George, were certainly intent on reducing the defence budget, not unreasonably saying, well, we've got to pay for this massive war we've just gone through. So the Army and the Navy said, well, you can save money if you abolish the Air Force. But Hugh Trenchard, who was the Chief of the Air Force at the time, and a very shrewd character, Trenchard actually said, we can save you money to the government. We can do things much more cheaply than the Army or the Navy, particularly the Army, and actually we're a relatively inexpensive force.
Yeah, and would it be fair to say that during the interwar period, that one of the great champions of the RAF and air defences and air power was Winston Churchill?
He certainly was. He was appointed as Secretary of State for War and Air immediately after the war by Lloyd George. And he, in conjunction with Trenchard convinced him that the Air Force was a good thing. And in that initial period, when Trenchard was, as it were, the senior politician in charge, he did help to preserve the Air Force. And he's generally a supporter of the Air Force. Later on, of course, he becomes Chancellor of the Exchequer. And funny old thing, like all chancellors, he doesn't want to spend much money. But he was never one of those who believed that you should abolish the Air Force.
And he makes a very strong argument, you know, from 1933 onwards, that Germany is building up the Luftwaffe and that we need to do something. And by the time 1940 comes and France has fallen, the retreat from Dunkirk has happened, and the Battle of Britain is upon us, we're quite seriously outnumbered, aren't we?
We are. There's a bit of exaggeration about the numbers. The Luftwaffe is a bigger air force, but generally speaking, there's a rough equivalence between the two fighter forces. But the Germans, of course, can choose where they're going to attack, and by the time of the Battle of Britain, they have airfields stretching from Brittany right round to Norway. So Britain is partially surrounded, if you like. And Fighter Command has to defend the entire country. The Germans, of course, basically mostly concentrate on the southern part of the country. They only attack in the north once during the Battle of Britain. But Hugh Dowding, the commander of Fighter Command, he has to cover the whole country. So in the air, the fighter pilots did often meet superior numbers. The great advantage that we had, of course, was that Britain had a proper radar-directed air defence system, the first in the world. Remarkably, the very first experiment in radar had only taken place in 1935. The RAF had flown an aeroplane up and down near the BBC, I'm sorry to mention your rivals, but the BBC transmitter...
Well, they were there first.
The BBC transmitter near Daventry, and Watson Watt, the famous inventor of radar, had his equipment in a field. He and Mr. Wilkins, who everybody forgets, sat in a field literally with their equipment in the back of a van and proved the concept of bouncing a radio wave off an airplane.
And it's interesting to note, isn't it, that with the Battle of Britain, I think maybe we don't discuss this enough, that it wasn't just British people in the air fighting in Spitfires and Hurricanes.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There were significant numbers of Poles, there were Canadians, Australians, there were even a few Americans and a few Frenchmen, but a whole polyglot conglomeration of nations.
And I even saw a cafe in Prague last year in the Czech Republic called the Spitfire Cafe, commemorating the fact that they'd had a contribution too.
Indeed.
I mean, it was called The Finest Hour and Never in the Field of Human History and all of those things, and it's seen as a glorious moment. But thereafter, you know, under Bomber Harris, as he was known, Sir Arthur Harris, we launched this, well, along with the Americans too, of course, massive bombing campaign on German cities. And I know finally a memorial's gone up to Bomber Command here in central London. Is there a feeling on this centenary day, when there is much to remember and quite a bit to celebrate, is there still a feeling that perhaps some of those decisions taken about cities to be bombed in late 44 and through 45 does slightly mar the RAF's history?
Well, that's certainly a view that some people take. My own opinion is that You have an extremely powerful bomber force which you've built up at great cost during the war. The Germans are still fighting hard, and so you're not simply going to let that bomber force sit on the ground. And it's as well to remember that people talk about it's only bombing cities. They're not only bombing cities. The RAF and the 8th Air Force, between them, and indeed there's another Air Force down in Italy, they reduce the Germans' capacity to manufacture oil, much of it done using synthetic technologies, by about 90% by early 1945. Harris is often criticised, but he did what he was asked to do. And by the time you're into early 1945, German oil refining capacity is down to about 10% of its theoretical maximum, and you have the much vaunted panzer divisions unable to manoeuvre. They can manoeuvre tactically, but
That's a very important point.
They can't do it.
That's
what
a very
you might call
important point.
strategically.
Yeah.
And the Germans have not given up. You know, there are significant casualties to the Allied armies fighting in Western Europe, who included my father. The Germans don't give up until the end of the war.
Yeah.
They are inflicting serious casualties on the Allies. You are not going to keep these bombers on the ground until you've won the war.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we go ahead from there, I mean, we obviously remember the Vulcan bombers bombing Port Stanley, but actually in the last 20 years, the Royal Air Force has been very busy, hasn't it?
It has. It's been busy practically every day. The Air Force has been engaged since really Gulf War I in the early 90s. The Air Force has been active practically every day since that time, and it still is, of course, in the Middle East. We're still operating. The Air Force was in Iraq, the Air Force was in Afghanistan, and it's still there, still operating against the enemies of the Queen and protecting the nation.
Well, I have to say on this centenary, what do people who are listening to this who are fascinated, where do they go to find out more about the RAF, or if they want to help, where would they give money?
Well, the major RAF charities have formed a sort of central RAF 100 charity, so that they're not all fighting, as it were, for your money.
Yep.
So they will divide it between them. So it includes, for example, the RAF Benevolent Fund, the RAF Association, the RAF Museum. These 5 major charities have all combined so that they're not splitting your money. You can only devote your money to the RAF 100 charity rather than saying, oh, which one shall I go for?
Yep.
So there's an RAF 100 website. If you Google it,
Yep.
you will find it. And if they want to learn more, then I recommend that they go to the RAF Museum at Hendon, which has got a major new exhibition to be opened shortly, devoted to the 100 years of the Royal Air Force, and it's going to be absolutely spectacular.
Well, Seb Cox, head of the Air Historical Branch of the RAF, can I wish you a very happy 100th birthday?
Thank you very much, Nigel.
Well, I don't know about you, I learnt an awful lot there from Seb Cox. In a moment, your thoughts, your reflections on what the RAF means to you on its 100th birthday. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:18. Well, that's the RAF March, and I played a little bit of it there because it's the 100th birthday of the Royal Air Force. And, of course, this is LBC. Unlike all the other Sunday programmes, which have just become really journalists talking to journalists, this is your chance. And I want to know from you, what has the RAF meant to you and to your family? And Caroline from Fulham says, all those lovely tunes that evoke so much to so many. Today, 100 years of the RAF, Dam Busters, etc. Were taught to generations of music students at Kneller Hall, now being eyed for housing. So there we are, the music. And it is, I have to say, the RAF March, really quite uplifting, isn't it? But I suppose if you're joining a service with the casualty rates the RAF have got, you've got to do something to try and cheer everybody up. And I say that because Bomber Command, and I mentioned this in the interview I did earlier, you think about the numbers, 125,000 people served in Bomber Command in World War II, and of those, 56,000 were killed. Given that probably the last 20,000 of those had not completed their tours when the war ended, basically, if you served in Bomber Command, you had a 50% chance of being killed. So it was pretty grim work from our perspective, and some would argue maybe we went too far. I don't know. I'm going to ask Marion from Finchley what 100 years of the RAF means to her and her family.
Hello, Nigel. I'm delighted to have this opportunity of putting the name of my dear Uncle Edric Williams, onto your show.
Yeah.
He was conscripted into the Royal Naval Air Service in 1917, training to be a wireless operator gun layer. I'm reading this from a little book I wrote about my family. He then flew in airships from Folkestone to France, escorting troop ships over and Red Cross ships back, spotting mines floating in the water. He sat in the front of the airship, the pilot sitting behind him.
Gosh.
With a 60 HP Rolls-Royce engine at the back. They flew every day, weather permitting. And, of course, he was very, very young, and he was only 18, and, of course, he was very scared. I mean, I didn't talk at great length with him about it, but clearly it wasn't a fun game, and as you say, well, the casualties in the Second World War were terrible, but of course in the First World War it was no fun either.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, at times for RFC and then RAF pilots, sort of life expectancy of about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Very much backed up by what, you know, Seb Cox said earlier, that a squadron's planes would probably, in a month, have 100% rotation. So, no, absolutely. So, Marion, it means, that's what it means to you. It means these airships across the channel.
Also, Nigel, though, during the Second World War, I was a very little girl, but of course I used to see these planes flying overhead, and naturally they were usually Allied ones, either RAF or American. So, naturally, I grew up with the sound of engines and always thought very, very highly of the Royal Air Force and our heroes.
And Marion, do you have any nagging doubts about Hamburg, Dresden, what was done to German civilians?
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever. OK, Marion, thank you very much indeed for your call. And lots of messages. I'm 80 years old, I lived through the war, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the RAF, says Jean from Sheffield. And that's a sentiment, I think, that many people would share. My grandfather was a gym instructor in the Royal Air Force. He was from Belfast. I recently found this out from researching my history. I feel very proud of him, says Ruth from Solihull. And Ruth, it's very interesting. It's so much easier now to research your family's history. In the old days, you had to go to the Public Records Office in Kew and go through the files. Now with the internet, family searches get bigger and bigger because, hey, they're just easier and easier. Simon is calling from Bolton. Good morning, Simon.
Hi, Nigel. We have spoken before. I'm ex-military, as you know myself, but most to the point is my mother and father served in the Second World War. My dad was with Montgomery in the desert,
yeah.
And my mum used to drive for Vickers Armstrong, delivering the Hurricane wings and the Spitfire wings to various places. But on occasion, she was seconded to drive Sir Mr. Bomber Harris about
to
different places. But why I like the RAF so much is my father was burnt in the desert in the Second World War. Not badly, but burnt. But his troop was saved by RAF. The RAF pilots came in and fought off the attackers. So they hold great esteem in me, and most of the point is when I've mounted guard at Buckingham Palace and I've mounted guards with the RAF, and that, it's such a great pleasure, and all credit to any old-timers, because, Nigel, at the end of the day, had it not been for them, we wouldn't be here as we are today.
Well, I think that's right. No, I think that's absolutely right. And Simon, you've highlighted the role that women played. And, of course, there were female pilots who were delivering bombers and fighters all over the country. And I do sometimes think perhaps the role of women in World War II gets somewhat underplayed. Thank you, Simon, for your call. Going to go to Mike in York. What does the RAF at 100 mean to you, Mike?
Very much a lot there, Nigel. My dad flew with 115 Squadron from Witchford.
Yep.
They were Lancasters, and he did the last 12 months of the war. He was a bomb aimer.
Yep.
And I have no regrets what happened. I know for a fact that when he came home, he lived in Manchester and seen what the Luftwaffe had done to Manchester and other cities. It's easy now to condemn them, but at the time they didn't know what we know now. But can I just say, your guest spoke eloquently about the RAF and its achievements.
Yep.
But what he failed to mention is one of the things that my dad did was drop food in the Netherlands.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Lancasters did not just drop bombs, they dropped food into the Netherlands where people were starving. They also, of course, in 1948, Mike, the RAF played a massive role in the Berlin airlift, getting food in to Berlin. So, no, you're quite right. The RAF has an important peacetime role as well.
Can I just say one other thing, Nigel?
Quickly, yeah.
Yeah, the other thing is, after the war, that Lancasters brought prisoners home. Prisoners of war were brought home by the RAF.
Yeah. Mike, thank you. Well, in a moment, you're going to listen to an interview I did yesterday with Flight Lieutenant Bob Hughes. I was down in Kent at the Shoreham Aircraft Museum. But for now, you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 11:30. The Royal Air Force is 100 today, and I'm asking you, what has it meant to you and to your family? You can let me know on 03456 6060 973. And even if you've got no link at all with the RAF, I hope by listening to this hour, you might just learn something you didn't know before, because I have already. Now, yesterday, on the eve of this anniversary, I went down to the Shoreham Aircraft Museum, little village in Kent, just outside Sevenoaks, very close to where I live and very close to Biggin Hill. I was hoping to meet two World War II veterans, but one of them, Tom Neal, Spitfire pilot, had a tooth abscess, which I tell you what, a tooth abscess is horrible, you know, if you're 25, let alone, I think he's 97 or something like that. But there was a World War II veteran on parade, Flight Lieutenant Bob Hughes, DFC AE, and Bob was there, he's getting on a bit, and he was treated like a mega celebrity, and about an hour people just queued continuously to have their photograph with him, and he was signing a portrait of himself. So by the time I got to him, he was a little bit tired, but still very, very keen to talk about his experiences. And in 1940, he was in Blenheims, and I started by asking him if he thought he was going to get through the war.
I did. I was pretty sure.
Well, you never doubted for one moment that...
No. There were a lot that we were fighting, you know.
But, I mean, the rest of Europe had fallen. Britain was standing alone.
But somebody got to fight and stand up against them. We couldn't let them get away with it.
And you're right, we didn't, and we succeeded. And when you look back, you know, I mean, it's a long time ago, all this. It's 78 years ago, 1940, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does it feel to be, and we've got all these young people around here.
Yeah.
Do you realise that, I mean, the RAF tomorrow is going to be 100 years old.
Yes, I realise that.
But you're nearly as old as the RAF.
I'm 97.
Oh, you're quite young then, really, then.
Yeah, 97.
And what does, having served in the RAF, what does that mean to you now?
Well, I'm pleased that I had the opportunity to do it. Really.
And do you think young people today really understand the sacrifices that your generation had to make?
Different people have got different ideas. Yes, a few of them were quite pleased that we'd done it. Quite a lot of them, I dare say, but there was quite a few that couldn't care less.
No, but that probably applied all through history anyway.
Yeah.
But the what do you think back to 1940? Does it bring back good memories, bad memories, a bit of everything?
Wonderful memories. Wonderful memories.
What, people, places?
I had a wife that I've lost since, and she was in the WAF as well, you know.
And as we celebrate this 100th birthday of the Royal Air Force, do you think the Royal Air Force has a great future going on from here?
Oh, yes, I do. I do. Yeah.
Well, there aren't so many of them now. It's a bit smaller. It's a bit more high tech. And, but tell us a bit about the Blenheim as an aeroplane, what it did.
A wonderful aircraft. I don't know. You know, I can picture it over and over again that it's lovely to be in it, to fly in it.
And how many people would serve on that plane?
3 or 4 usually.
And tell us,
Quite often it was just the skipper who was saying, "Bob, it's your turn now, come up and have a go." And that's the thing that pleased me more than anything, that I was allowed to fly the plane. And we did quite several times, if you had a good pilot who was relied on you.
But I guess you had to keep your eyes out, didn't you, in 1940? Because there were some people out there who didn't wish you anything but harm.
Yes, I suppose so. I suppose so.
I have to say, you seem in amazing good humour. You're very positive about all the things that happened in the past, and you know, you helped defeat the Nazis.
Yes, yes. I was thrilled that I had the opportunity.
Well, I have to say, I think it's remarkable to talk to somebody who 78 years ago was involved at the time in what probably is the greatest...
97.
You were 97?
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, you don't look 97.
Now I'm going to America now as soon as I can to celebrate several things.
You're going to America?
Yes, soon.
It's quite old to be going to America, isn't it?
I dare say, but I can appreciate probably more than I would have done if I'd have gone younger.
Well, I have to say, I've got before me this really quite magnificent picture of you.
As a matter of fact, of all the photographs when I've had a picture taken here and there, this was the only one that looked like anything like me.
I noticed that you're smoking a pipe. That was quite common in those days.
Yes, I like the pipe.
When did you... Can I ask when...
I don't care for cigarettes at all, but I do like the pipe.
Can I ask when you gave up smoking?
Oh, I suppose when I was about 30.
Okay, well, it's a wonderful, wonderful picture of you, pipe clenched firmly between teeth, and Flight Lieutenant Bob Hughes, DFC AE, I have to say, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you, and I think it's probably what I want you to do is to wish the Royal Air Force a happy 100th birthday.
I do.
He said after that he'd like to join again. A remarkable, amazing picture of him with his pipe, and hey, in 1940, though he wasn't the pilot, he did fly the Blenheim during the period of the Battle of Britain. He then went on, Bob, and served on 1,000 bomber raids in Lancaster and just lived an extraordinary life. And I've rarely met anybody quite so optimistic about life and still full at 97 of good humour. Come in, Nigel. It's Shoreham Aircraft Museum here, listening into your show and loving it. Don't forget, us, we're waiting with the Spitfire Ale to celebrate the RAF 100. Not today, folks, but it's a lovely idea. So, there aren't many of that generation left. I mean, not much more than a handful of people who were in the air in 1940 still survive. So that opportunity yesterday was one that I grabbed with both hands. I'm going to go to Peter in Hampstead and ask him, what's the RAF meant to you and your family over the last 100 years, Peter?
Well, I think what it's meant to me, I'm from West Hampstead, actually. Don't want to be have the old lovies in Hampstead rubbed off on me.
Right, OK. Peter from West Hampstead, OK.
Absolutely right. I think what a lot of people relate to the RAF through the red arrows.
Yeah.
And the girl next door was struck dumb. She didn't speak for 10 minutes when they passed over West Hampstead on the way to the Olympics. And they were stunning. But I have heard a story, just flying past, about 1,200 feet.
They are still a fantastic sight, aren't they?
They are, but I've heard a story, and I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but their aircraft are very elderly and somewhat flaky. And I think it is absolutely preposterous if it's true. And I think that if this is true, then they should be given as a 100th birthday present a complete set of new aircraft.
Yeah. There was talk, Peter, as part of defence cuts of the red arrows being phased out, which I think would be dreadful. So these aircraft, to your knowledge, Peter, from West Hampstead, these aircraft are old and need replacing, yeah?
I've heard this story, and the thing is, it's not a complete loss, because these aircraft are perfectly excellent for training purposes. They can be sold, they can be used in the RAF, or they can be sold abroad for advanced training purposes, and get a complete set of new Hawks in as a 100th anniversary.
Right, and you think that... And the Red Arrows are a good advertisement of the Royal Air Force to people in this country and all around the world, and they're amazing flying skills, too.
Oh, they're beyond extraordinary. When you bear in mind the fact that they're only 5 or 6 foot apart,
yes,
and they're flying at 300 miles an hour.
Yeah, when they cross each other, it's almost scary to watch it, isn't it? Peter, the Red Arrows must be saved and modernised at all costs. I thank you very much indeed. Bill says to me, what the RAF and all armed services, past and present, mean to me at 71 is I've gone to bed every night without fear or hunger, for which I'm grateful. There is a plaque at Errol Airfield to commemorate the Russian pilot aces who taught our pilots during the Second World War, says Graham from Errol in Scotland. Happy Easter, Nigel. I remember the Lancaster aircraft flying over during the war in Dorset, where I was born, and watching them fly back, and still remember the sound. We owe our lives to them. Well, I guess that's pretty powerful stuff. My uncle crossed the Irish border at 15, lied about his age, joined the RAF, spent 31 years there. Him and his wife, a member of the WAF, then had 11 children in 6 different countries. Happy birthday to the RAF, says Simon. Simon, I think you've got a family connection to the RAF. I really, really do. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 11:46. Well, that's the RAF March, and the RAF is 100 today. Emma in Hertford texts me to say the 97-year-old ex-Royal Air Force serviceman who just called was lovely to listen to. And I got just emotional, so emotional, listening to the two of you talk. Emma, it was filmed too. And if you go to Twitter, at Nigel_Farage, you will see a short film of my visit to the Shoreham Museum and my interview with Flight Lieutenant Bob Hughes. Now, my next caller is called Bill, and he's calling from Orpington. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Nigel.
Now, my telephone people tell me that you've got a story to tell us.
It is a good story. I'm 96. I was in the RAF for 5 years during the war.
Right.
And just to start off, this story made the Liverpool newspapers at the time. I'm a Liverpoolian. But I was posted out. I did a session here at a maintenance unit, and I was posted to India, and at a place called Baripur. And the CEO had put a notice on the notice board asking for an artist to decorate the mess, the officers' mess. And when I went, I was told, it was Wing Commander Nicholson, who was the only RAF pilot to win the Victoria Cross. And he was just like Kenneth Moore.
Like Kenneth Moore, right, yes.
A glass of whiskey. And I said, what do you like? He said, you do what you like. So for some reason, I did the Arabian Nights round this mess. And the feature was the Caliph of Baghdad on a flying carpet, but a gross figure stoned out of his mind and holding a glass of wine that was spilling. And I just about finished this, and I was told an Air Chief Marshal was coming to look at it. And he came in, flanked by 2 officers, and he was the dead image of this Caliph. And he didn't say anything, but when he left, the 2 officers came back in, and one said, he leaned over and said, we would like you to put a moustache and beard on that. What happened? But it was incredible. I froze. But anyway, the story got later. I did 3 murals. By the way, I'm an ex-cartoonist. I did a famous strip in the Daily Mirror.
Okay.
Called The Perishers.
The Perishers. My goodness me. And Bill, you're with us, you're 96, you're clearly with it.
Absolutely.
But there's an awful lot of people who died in their early 20s in the RAF, aren't there?
Absolutely, yeah.
And how do you, when you look back...
I met some of these fellas,
yes,
boys, because some of them were sent out. And they're terrific people. And I'll tell you what, you remind me of them. Because their attitude was, they come over here with their bloody swastikas and crosses.
Spoken like a true cartoonist, Bill. Bill, great call. Thank you very much indeed. The satirist in Bill still alive and kicking at 96. Very, very good. Jackie from Watford makes the point, Lancaster bombers brought back the injured in World War II. So Lancaster's brought back former prisoners of war, they brought back the injured, they dropped food into the Netherlands, and of course in the Berlin airlift in 1948. Not just bombs. Anthony is calling from Jersey in the Channel Islands. Good morning, Anthony.
Good morning. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Not at all.
I'm not from Jersey. I'm from Manchester. I was born before the war. I'm in my 80s now, and I experienced the Blitz as a schoolboy. And I have served as a national serviceman, but I was in the army in Malaya in the early 50s. And then the late 50s, I was accepted as a cabin crew member, which in those days was BOAC, which is British Airways now.
Yep.
And the flight deck, majority of the flight deck were ex-bomber command pilots, and they were the salt of the earth. I've got the utmost respect for them. There was one captain, he was involved in the sinking of the pocket battleship, the Tirpitz. There were Pathfinders, and they were a great bunch to be with. I was very privileged. And on one occasion, one of my passengers was Douglas Bader.
Oh, wow.
And, I've got great memories. And
now, for those, Anthony, for those who don't know Douglas Bader was a young pilot who, performing an aeronautical stunt before the war, lost both his legs, and no one ever thought he would fly again. And he did fly again. He commanded a big wing during the Battle of Britain. He was ultimately shot down over Europe, became a prisoner, and was such a blooming nuisance, he finished up the war in Colditz. So that's who Douglas Bader is, for those that don't know. And Anthony, when you look at those people that you serve with, were they a different type of person, do you think?
Well, they were. There was no edge with them at all. They were like one of the boys, if you know. With totally different now, of course, and it changed actually. In the 60s and 70s, when they were coming in from the universities and that, they were a different breed. But as I say, I've got great respect for them, and
and Anthony,
we'll never see the like again. That's for sure.
No, you may well be right. And Anthony, just very quickly, do you, having lived through that period, have any qualms about Hamburg, Dresden, the big bombing raids?
None at all. I mean, Manchester. I live right in virtually the centre, man. We got bombed out. We were in the shelters in the streets, which were the street shelters. They were blast-proof, but not bomb-proof.
Yeah.
So I've got no regrets to that.
No qualms.
I tell you, but I do. What does grieve me, Mr. Farage, is the fact that we won the war in 1945, and in 1972. Edward Heath gave our country away without firing a shot.
Now, Anthony, I'm going to stop you there because it's Easter Sunday. It's Easter Sunday, and I'm honestly, I promise you, it's a Brexit-free zone. But I do completely understand what you're saying. A lot of people said that to me, and not just. And if I was to be a little bit political, that all those people from the Commonwealth and countries all around the world who'd stood by our side, they were pretty upset back in 1972 as well. But I'm trying to be good on this Easter Sunday. Kevin says on Facebook, "Hi Nigel, I'm now off to Martlesham Heath Museum, where Sir Douglas Bader was stationed and flew Hurricanes." Vandra says, "Feel quite nostalgic when I hear the RAF music. Incredible what all those mostly young men did in defence of freedom. My dad flew Lancasters in Bomber Command. My family recently celebrated with a small belated recognition from this government." Well, Bomber Command, as I've said already, very, very controversial, and after the war, even immediately after Dresden, there was a feeling that perhaps we'd gone just too far with the whole thing. I think I'm right in saying about 600,000 German civilians died through those bombing raids in World War II. In fact, many of their cities were literally flattened. And I think if you wonder about the morality of it, well, I spoke, didn't I, earlier, to the RAF historian who said, look, don't make any mistake about it. The Germans were still fighting. We were still taking very, very big casualties. What I remember is asking that very question to a guy who'd served on many Lancaster missions, and in fact, I was a junior member of the same golf club, and I talked to him about that, and he said, "Do you know what?" He said, "When we saw the pictures from Belsen, we realised that we had to do whatever we possibly could to win the war, and those pictures, for me, justified what we did." Happy birthday to the RAF at 100, without whom we would not have stayed a free country. Of that there is no doubt. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow night at 7. At 3 this afternoon, it's Kevin Maguire. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel.